What if the teacher you underestimated was the one who would change your life forever? In a world where prestige speaks louder than purpose, one man steps into a classroom filled with privilege, prejudice, and pressure, and turns it into a place of truth, transformation, and undeniable genius. This is not just a story. It's a lesson in resilience, in quiet brilliance, and in the power of education to break every expectation. Before we dive into the genius nobody knew, if stories like this move you, if you believe in the power of storytelling to spark thought and inspire change, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful narratives like this one. And after the story ends, we want to hear from you. What part of this story spoke to you the most? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. Now, take a breath. Settle in. Because what you're about to hear is a story you won't forget. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction. Any similarities to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events are purely coincidental. The genius nobody knew was created solely for the purpose of delivering moral lessons, motivation, inspiration, and educational value. It is intended to encourage thoughtful reflection and personal growth. The characters, settings, and situations are entirely imaginative and should not be interpreted as representations of real individuals or institutions. Viewer discretion is advised for those seeking factual accounts. This story is meant to inspire, not to document. In the heart of Detroit, where ambition meets tradition, a quiet new teacher enters the gates of one of the city's most elite private schools. He is black, reserved, and unfamiliar to the circles of wealth and privilege that define Edison Heights Academy. From day one, he is doubted by parents, faculty, and even the students he's meant to teach. But what no one knows is that Dr. Elijah Monroe is not just a teacher. He is a former Ivy League professor with a mind shaped by brilliance and a heart shaped by hardship. He has come not to prove himself, but to awaken something long forgotten, in the classroom and in the lives of those who dare to listen. As tensions rise, reputations are tested, and young minds begin to blossom, the truth slowly surfaces. This is a story about transformation, about the courage to teach beyond the textbook, and about what happens when we finally see the genius that's been standing right in front of us all along. This is the genius nobody knew. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall, arched windows of Edison Heights Academy, casting golden streaks across the polished marble floors. The building, a neo-Gothic masterpiece nestled in the heart of Detroit's wealthiest district, gleamed with the pride of tradition. Its towering columns, velvet curtained classrooms, and manicured lawns screamed prestige and exclusivity. The kind of place that cost more to attend than most families made in a year. At precisely 8:30, the school bell rang, its chime echoing with the elegance of a cathedral. Students dressed in crisp navy uniforms with silver emblems shuffled through the halls, laughter and gossip bouncing between lockers. Their polished loafers clicked confidently against the tiles. These were the children of lawyers, tech moguls, hedge fund managers, and socialites. They had grown up with private tutors, summer programs in Switzerland, and resumes being built before they could ride bikes. But this morning, a new presence stood in the main hallway. Dr. Elijah Monroe stood quietly in front of room 3B, his hands tucked into the pockets of a charcoal wool overcoat. His shoes, old but well-kept, carried a shine that revealed discipline. He wore no badge, no lanyard, no sign of introduction. His frame was tall, his posture calm. Salt and pepper hair coiled tightly around his scalp, and his eyes held the depth of someone who had walked through many doors in life and chosen silence over spectacle. Some students passed without a second glance. Others gave a quick double take, exchanging confused looks with their friends. One student, a curious 7th grader named Jalen, whispered, "Who's that?" to no one in particular. Inside the administration office, Principal Harding adjusted her glasses nervously. She had hoped to introduce Dr. Monroe formally but had been forced to rush his hiring due to an unexpected scandal involving the previous teacher of advanced studies. She watched from her office window, already sensing the storm brewing. Across the city, parents were sipping their morning espresso in glass-walled kitchens, their phones buzzing with text messages and social media pings. New teacher. Tall black guy. Doesn't look like Edison material. That was one message. Another read. No announcement? What's going on with the board? And then, from Claudia Whitmore herself, the queen bee of the parent council. If we let just anyone walk into that classroom, what are we paying 30 grand a year for? The protest hadn't even started officially, but the fuse had been lit. Inside room 3B, Elijah calmly unpacked a weathered leather satchel. From it, he pulled a small stack of books, some worn, others annotated with colorful sticky tabs. Titles ranged from Plato's Republic to The Souls of Black Folk to a first-edition poetry collection by Audre Lorde. He set them on the desk in front of him like totems, then wrote his name on the chalkboard in clean cursive. Dr. Monroe. Not Mr. Not Coach. Not just Elijah. Dr. Monroe. The students filed in slowly, like they were walking into a museum they weren't sure they wanted to visit. Some took their seats without comment. Others whispered. One boy snorted and said aloud, "Where's the real teacher?" Elijah turned, met his eyes, and smiled. "I am the real teacher," he said softly. "But that part isn't important yet. What matters is what you're here to learn." There was a pause. Then a smirk. Then a few giggles. "Today," Elijah continued, ignoring the noise, "we're going to begin by asking a question." He turned back to the board and wrote a single word in large, capitalized chalk strokes. What? That one word silenced the room more than any shout or threat could have. The students stared at it, confused, intrigued, maybe even unsettled. "Every great thing that's ever happened," Elijah said, still facing the board, "started with someone asking that question. Not how, not when, but why. I want you to write your own why on a piece of paper. It can be anything. Why you're here. Why you believe in something. Why you don't. You'll have 5 minutes." He turned and sat at his desk. No textbook. No rules. No introduction speech. Just a question. By the end of the first class, Elijah had already caused a shift. Small but real. Some students were intrigued. Others were irritated. But none of them were bored. And that, at Edison Heights, was rare. Meanwhile, in a downtown office tower, Stephen Lansing, the CEO of an app worth $500 million, paced in his office. His assistant had just told him that a new teacher had been assigned to his daughter's class without approval. He picked up his phone and dialed the principal. "This better be temporary," he said, his voice sharp as glass. "It's not," she replied, holding her ground. "You do realize what kind of reputation this school has? What we expect." There was a pause. "Yes, Mr. Lansing," Principal Harding said, her voice measured. "Which is exactly why we hired him." In a high-ceilinged sitting room adorned with ivory wallpaper and a chandelier imported from Venice, Claudia Whitmore sat at the head of a circular glass table. The morning light danced across her silver bracelet as she scrolled through her tablet with a single manicured finger. She looked up sharply when the door to her private lounge opened and a line of familiar faces entered. Parents of Edison Heights students, all pillars of Detroit's elite. Stephen Lansing arrived first, as punctual and precise as the watches he collected. Next came Madeline Chu, a surgeon known for her quiet authority, followed by Mark Patel, who had made his fortune in logistics and now spent his days obsessing over his twin sons' academic trajectories. A few others followed, murmuring greetings and adjusting their coats. Claudia stood and cleared her throat. "I don't want to overstate things," she began, "but this situation is unacceptable." She tapped her screen and a photo of Dr. Monroe appeared, taken from the hallway security footage that one of the tech-savvy parents had acquired. There he was, stoic and composed, writing on the chalkboard in a room full of students. "This man, Elijah Monroe, is now teaching advanced studies to our children." No announcement. No vetting process. No credentials shared. The board slipped him in without so much as an email. Madeline crossed her arms. "Has anyone spoken with him directly?" Stephen scoffed. "That's not the point. We're paying to have the best, not whoever this is." "I asked Emily how her class went," Claudia continued. "She said they spent the whole period writing about the word why. No syllabus. No structure. Just questions. I don't pay tuition for philosophy games." Mark chuckled dryly. "My boy said he was cool. One of them said it was the first time he actually listened in class. That earned him several sideways looks." Claudia leaned forward. "Look, I'm not saying he's a bad person. But our kids are in crucial stages. Middle school sets the tone for high school. And high school sets the tone for everything else. I didn't mortgage a summer home to have my child become a free thinker without direction." Laughter followed, light but tense. "Let's go to the board," Stephen said. "We have the numbers. If we call a formal meeting and demand transparency, they'll have to respond." Claudia nodded. "Agreed. We'll request his file, credentials, and an immediate evaluation. Until then, we push the principal to assign an oversight officer. Someone to sit in the classroom." Across town, Elijah Monroe walked through a quiet bookstore tucked between two laundromats on Detroit's east side. The store was cramped but rich with the smell of paper and dust. He exchanged nods with the owner, then made his way to the philosophy section. He ran his fingers along the spines like one might touch the keys of a piano, stopping to pick up a dog-eared copy of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He paid in cash, nodded once more, and returned to his modest apartment, where stacks of journals, lesson plans, and student writing samples covered his kitchen table. He read each piece carefully, scribbling feedback in tidy cursive, occasionally glancing out the window at the neighborhood children playing basketball in the alley below. Back at Edison Heights, the protests began in subtle waves. A parent emailed the school board suggesting Dr. Monroe lacked classroom discipline. Another claimed her son felt unsettled by the unstructured nature of the class. A third forwarded a rumor that he used non-approved books. Within a week, whispers turned into complaints. And by the time Friday came, Principal Harding had 10 emails flagged with subject lines that all read, "Concern regarding Dr. Monroe." Still, Elijah remained calm. He stood in front of room 3B every morning. Never late, never flustered. His lessons continued, rooted in inquiry, critical thinking, and rigorous challenge. Students debated ideas, wrote essays that pierced deeper than expected, and found themselves waking up early just to talk about class before the bell. One morning, a student named Amira raised her hand and asked, "Why don't we have tests?" Elijah looked at her and said, "Do you think a test is the only way to know what you've learned?" She thought for a moment. "No. But that's how other teachers do it." "That doesn't make it right," he replied. "What I care about is how you think. Not what you memorize. What you do when no one gives you the answer." There was a silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was curious. The kind of silence that invited possibility. Amira wrote about that moment in her weekly journal. She titled her entry, "The Day I Realized My Mind Was Mine." Elijah read it that night. He did not smile. But he circled the title in red and wrote only 2 words beside it: "Keep going." Later that week, an email landed in Claudia Whitmore's inbox. To Claudia Whitmore. From Principal Harding. Subject, regarding your concerns. Read, "Dear Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for your email. I want to assure you that Dr. Elijah Monroe is a fully certified educator with more than 20 years of experience. He has passed all background checks and was selected based on his remarkable approach to education. We stand by his appointment and ask for your continued patience as we work to provide the best for all our students." Claudia tossed her phone onto the couch. The circle of parents would not be pleased. The next Monday morning brought a soft rain to the city of Detroit. Water streaked across the stained glass windows of Edison Heights Academy, casting shifting colors on the hallway floors. Inside room 3B, the students found the lights dimmed and the windows open just enough to let in the sound of the rain. On the chalkboard was a single sentence, scrawled in bold white letters. "You can know the whole world and still not know yourself." There was no name, no context, just the words. As the students entered and took their seats, Elijah remained at his desk, silent. He let the room settle. He let the noise dissolve into stillness. Then finally he stood. "Today," he said, "we're going to talk about the hardest subject there is. Not history, not mathematics, not science. Today we talk about identity." The class blinked. He paced slowly as he spoke. "Who are you when there are no grades, no uniforms, no titles, no expectations? If the world stopped telling you who to be, who would you choose to become?" A few hands raised tentatively. Elijah nodded to a girl near the front. "I think I'd be quieter," she said. "I wouldn't have to pretend to be the smartest." Another hand. A boy this time. "I'd be funnier," he said, his voice unsure. "At home I have to be serious all the time. I think I'd just mess around more." Elijah smiled faintly, the first real smile many of them had seen from him. "You've just touched the edge of freedom," he said. "Now let's see what lies deeper." That day the class did not follow a worksheet. There was no PowerPoint, no projector. Instead they were handed notebooks, blank, unmarked, and free of prompts. Elijah called them freedom books. "You can write anything," he told them. "But whatever you write, be honest. Lie to the world if you must. But don't lie to these pages." Outside the classroom, the storm of criticism was building. The board had received more than 24 formal concerns. Parents demanded an open forum. Claudia Whitmore organized a petition that gathered over 60 signatures in 48 hours. Stephen Lansing requested a personal conference with Principal Harding, which she declined with a polite but firm response. Elijah knew. The whispers in the halls weren't quiet anymore. He noticed how some students watched him differently, curiously, nervously, as if measuring what the adults said against their own experience. One morning, a boy named Julian came into class late. He looked unsettled. Is something wrong? Elijah asked. Julian hesitated, then said, My dad said you were just a substitute, that you don't belong here. Elijah nodded slowly. Do you believe that? Julian shrugged. I don't know. I think you're different, but you make us think. You make us try. Elijah didn't respond with words. He simply walked to the chalkboard and erased the quote from earlier that week. Then he wrote something new. The truth never trembles under pressure. Only lies do. That week something shifted. Students began to linger after class. Some stayed behind to ask questions not about homework but about life. One boy asked Elijah how he handled grief. Another asked how to deal with the pressure of being perfect. A girl named Naomi stayed late one day and showed him a poem she had written in her notebook, hesitant and proud all at once. Elijah read it slowly, then handed it back. You're not writing for school, he said. You're writing to live. She blinked, then nodded, tears threatening at the edges of her lashes. Elsewhere in the school, the atmosphere was tense. Teachers were warned not to speak on the controversy. Principal Harding met daily with her board chair. But Elijah continued teaching with the same calm precision. No protest or policy changed his rhythm. On Friday, as the students filed in, they found a map of the world projected onto the whiteboard. Elijah stood beside it, holding a red marker. This, he said, is not the world. The class blinked. He circled the map. This is a symbol. An image of borders and nations made by men who thought lines could define value. But the real world has no such lines. The real world is messy, complex, beautiful, and you will enter it with nothing but your voice and your mind. He paused. So we will not follow the textbook this month. Instead, each of you will choose a problem in the world that matters to you. Poverty, or climate, injustice. You'll research it, present it, but more importantly, you'll propose a solution. Not just numbers, not just facts. I want your mind, your heart, your voice. Some students smiled. Others looked overwhelmed, but none looked away. That afternoon, Naomi brought her notebook home and showed it to her mother. Her mother, a corporate lawyer, read through the pages in silence. When she finished, she said softly, I've never seen you write like this. Naomi replied, I've never had a teacher like him. Her mother stared at the final page. At the bottom was a short phrase, written in Elijah's red ink. Your words are your power. Use them. The parents did not know what was happening yet. Not fully. But their children were changing. Slowly. Quietly. Completely. And the man they tried to remove had just begun. The first signs of transformation at Edison Heights were subtle, the kind of changes that only teachers and parents paying close attention might notice. A late assignment turned in early. A quiet student raising their hand. A group project completed without a single complaint. But then came the bigger signs. The midterm assessments, though not standardized, showed remarkable growth in Room 3B. Students who had once coasted on privilege and polished answers were now submitting essays with depth and nuance. One analysis of the Harlem Renaissance brought a literature teacher to tears. A reflection on the moral implications of artificial intelligence sparked a debate that spilled into 3 other classrooms. And while other students griped about exams and rubrics, the students in Dr. Monroe's class talked about ideas. They walked out of class quoting Baldwin and Morrison, Mandela and Du Bois. They stayed late. They came early. They asked questions that had no easy answers. By the 3rd week of March, the school board had no choice but to reevaluate. Principal Harding sat at the head of the boardroom table with a thick folder in front of her. Across from her sat 5 board members, each with a copy of the same folder. Before we proceed with the concerns brought forward, she began, I'd like to draw your attention to the data inside. She opened her folder. Dr. Monroe's class has shown the highest increase in critical thinking scores across the school. Feedback from non-academic staff shows improved behavior among his students. And we've received written commendations from 2 other departments noting increased engagement. Stephen Lansing narrowed his eyes. Engagement is not the same as academic success. Principal Harding flipped a page. Then let's talk success. His students are performing above the school's historical average on problem-solving assessments. And they're turning in work that other departments are using as models. Claudia Whitmore spoke next. Her voice, calm but stern, carried authority. No one here is denying that the students enjoy his class. But this school is built on legacy, on structure, on expectations. We can't allow a teacher, regardless of background, to circumvent established methods. Principal Harding closed her folder with deliberate calm. And yet, what if the established methods are the problem? Silence. The board shifted in their chairs. Claudia tapped a fingernail on the glass. Stephen leaned forward. Who is he? Really? Because no one with that level of effectiveness just shows up in Detroit with no fanfare. Harding nodded slowly. Funny you ask. I did some research. Digging really. Dr. Elijah Monroe isn't just any teacher. Before coming here, he was a tenured professor at Cambridge. Before that, he lectured at the Sorbonne in Paris. Before that, he led policy education for a United Nations initiative on post-colonial development. Claudia blinked. Stephen sat back stunned. He left that world, Harding continued, after a personal loss. His wife passed away 5 years ago. He returned to Detroit to care for his aging mother. Since then, he stayed out of the spotlight, working quietly with youth programs and literacy nonprofits. Why wouldn't he tell anyone? Claudia asked. Harding smiled faintly. Because he didn't come here to impress you. He came to teach. Meanwhile, Elijah remained blissfully outside the conversation, in his classroom where the walls were now covered in student projects. One was a hand-drawn timeline of African empires. Another was a multimedia presentation on the ethics of space colonization. And on the back wall, a string of student photographs hung beneath the banner. This is who we are becoming. That day, Elijah introduced something new. He called it the inner map. Each student received a large blank sheet of paper. This map isn't of the world, he said. It's of you. Draw the path of your life, where you've been, where you are, and where you hope to go. Use symbols, words, images, whatever helps you understand your own direction. Some students hesitated, but others jumped in quickly. Jalen drew a road lined with music notes, his journey from struggling reader to aspiring lyricist. Naomi sketched a mountain with clouds at the top and a ladder climbing through them. Even the quietest students found their voice on those pages. After class, Elijah sat alone in the dim room, flipping through the maps. One showed a boy's struggle to connect with his father. Another revealed a girl's dream of becoming a judge to fix the system that had failed her cousin. Each page a window, each student a world. He kept the maps in a special folder, more valuable to him than any textbook. They were proof, not of his success but of their awakening. But outside room 3B, the tension was not over. That night, Claudia invited several influential parents to her home once again. The food was catered. The wine was imported. And the agenda was pointed. I don't care what his resume says, she told them. He's not like us. He doesn't belong here. But not everyone at the table nodded. One mother, quiet, often overlooked, spoke up. My son told me he wants to be a writer now. He's never wanted to be anything before. He wrote a speech that made me cry. Dr. Monroe may not be one of us. But maybe that's exactly why he's what our children need. The table grew quiet. The ground beneath the old guard was shifting. Not with noise, but with truth. And Elijah Monroe, once an unknown shadow in the hallway, was becoming the brightest light in the building. Spring arrived in Detroit with its usual mix of cold defiance and sudden beauty. The city's trees bloomed in delicate pinks and whites, even as patches of snow still lingered in alleyways. The air shifted. And at Edison Heights, so did everything else. It was the week before the annual showcase, a tradition held each April in the school's grand auditorium, where each class presented something emblematic of their learning. It was the kind of event parents photographed obsessively and talked about at garden parties for weeks afterward. Most classes prepared with polished presentations, memorized lines, and crisp uniforms. But room 3B was quiet. There was no visible project. No posters. No rehearsals in the hallways. Just a note outside their door that read, "Please do not disturb the work within." Inside, Dr. Elijah Monroe had created something altogether different. The students had spent weeks reflecting, collaborating, writing, and rewriting. Each one had contributed something personal, a story, a theory, a performance, a question. They weren't building a display. They were building an experience. Naomi curated a collection of original poetry about identity and transformation. Jalen wrote and recorded a spoken word piece about being underestimated as a young black boy in a private school. Others created short films, visual art, and even a live debate on the ethics of privilege in education. Elijah gave them space. He guided but never interfered. He challenged but never imposed. You've already learned everything you need, he told them. Now trust yourselves enough to show it. Word of their mysterious showcase spread quickly. Parents speculated, some nervously. Claudia Whitmore in particular demanded more details, emailing Principal Harding twice in the same day. Her second message read, We expect excellence, not experimentation. The night of the showcase arrived with a red carpet feel. Edison Heights Auditorium was filled with tailored suits and luxury handbags. Violin music played softly as parents found their seats beneath the crystal chandeliers. Cameras were ready. Expectations were high. Class by class, the students took the stage. There were recitals, science demonstrations, and digital presentations. All polished, all professional. Then came room 3B. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight appeared at center stage, and in it stood Naomi. She wore no costume, no makeup, just a simple black dress and a journal in her hand. She looked out at the crowd, then opened her book and began to speak. They told me to be brilliant, but never too bold. To rise but not roar. To shine but not burn. And then came a man, who didn't tell me who to be, but asked, "Were you really?" And that question unsettled everything. The room was silent. Then came Jalen, stepping forward from the side. He wore headphones around his neck and held a mic connected to a small speaker. He launched into his piece, rhythmic and sharp. "You call us elite, but forget we bleed too. Ain't no $1 million trust can teach me to trust you. You ain't give us answers. You gave us the keys, made us write the map to the minds we don't see." More students emerged, each offering something. An argument, a reflection, a question that cut through the polished gloss of private education. One girl presented a digital portrait series she had taken of her classmates, capturing them not as students, but as dreamers, rebels, thinkers. At the end, the lights came back on. There was no applause at first, just stillness. And then, from somewhere near the front, a single clap. Then another. Then the room erupted. Not in polite applause, but in something more electric. Genuine. A few parents wiped their eyes. Others stood, unsure how to feel, caught between awe and confusion. Backstage, Elijah stood behind the curtain, his hands folded behind his back. He didn't step forward. He let the students have their moment. Principal Harding approached him quietly. "I hope you're ready," she said with a half smile. "For what?" "For the spotlight. They're going to start asking questions." He nodded once, his expression unreadable. That evening, long after the crowd had left and the auditorium had been cleared, Claudia Whitmore sat in her car staring at her daughter's poetry book. Naomi had left it in the passenger seat, the inside cover addressed to her mother in small, neat writing. "Mom, you always wanted me to be exceptional. He just taught me how to be myself." Claudia closed the book slowly, her pride tangled in a knot of discomfort and understanding. The next morning, Edison Heights was buzzing. The showcase had gone viral. A recording of Jalen's piece had already been reposted on several education blogs. Parents who once questioned Dr. Monroe were now asking to schedule meetings with him. Others asked for copies of the students' work to share with family and friends. But perhaps the most unexpected thing of all was the email Principal Harding received that afternoon. Subject: Inquiry. From the Office of Academic Excellence, United Nations Educational Division. Read: "We have recently reviewed a presentation created under the instruction of Dr. Elijah Monroe. We are reaching out to confirm if this is the same individual who previously led our educational reform think tank from 2009 to 2015. If so, we would be honored to reconnect with him." Harding forwarded the message to Elijah with a single line: "You've been found out." But Elijah Monroe didn't mind. He was no longer hiding. He had simply been waiting for them to be ready. Within days of the showcase, Edison Heights was transformed. Parents who once grumbled at the mention of room 3B were now asking how their children could be enrolled in Dr. Monroe's elective. Board members who had previously questioned his methods now sought private consultations. Even teachers who once kept their distance found themselves lingering outside his classroom door, curious about the man whose students had suddenly become the most intellectually alive in the building. But not everyone embraced the change. Claudia Whitmore, despite her private emotional reckoning, was not ready to let go of the legacy she had spent years cultivating. One built on tradition, control, and pristine reputation. She called for an emergency meeting of the Parent Leadership Committee. The meeting was held at her estate in Grosse Pointe, in a library filled with old leather-bound volumes and the scent of polished mahogany. Every face at the table represented money, status, and deep roots in the school's history. Claudia opened with practiced calm. "We must ask ourselves," she said, "what kind of school we want Edison Heights to remain." A father to her left nodded. "I agree. This experimental teaching might be effective in the short term, but what happens when our children apply to universities? Will they recognize non-traditional metrics? Will they value personal maps over standard essays? Another chimed in. And what about discipline? Uniformity? This school's strength has always been structure. But then a voice from the back interrupted. It was the quiet mother from the showcase, the one who had spoken once before. My son reads every night now, she said. He used to hate books. He asked to write an essay about philosophy, for fun. I don't care if the methods are traditional. I care that they work. There was a shift in the room, a ripple of discomfort, of curiosity. Claudia kept her composure, but her fingers tightened around her glass of wine. Later that evening, she drafted a letter, long, impassioned, meticulously worded. It outlined her concerns not just about Elijah Monroe's teaching methods, but about the school's shifting identity under Principal Harding's leadership. She titled it, The Cost of Disruption, a Call to Preserve Our Standards. It was meant to be private, but within 48 hours, it was leaked to the school community. The backlash was swift and divided. Some parents supported Claudia, praising her for standing up for excellence. Others were outraged, accusing her of cloaking prejudice in the language of professionalism. Elijah, meanwhile, said nothing publicly. When a reporter from the Detroit Free Press reached out for comment, he declined. He kept teaching. He walked into room 3B with the same calm gait, the same thoughtful voice, the same focus on growth, truth, and trust. But his students sensed something had shifted. He carried an edge now, a kind of emotional gravity they hadn't seen before. One afternoon, as the room worked quietly on their final projects, Elijah stood by the window and spoke. There are people, he said, who will never see past your skin, past your name, past where you come from, no matter how much you prove, no matter how well you perform. He turned from the glass, his voice steady. So the question becomes, will you let them define you, or will you define yourself in every room you walk into? Silence. Then Naomi said quietly, is that why you left Cambridge? The room froze. Elijah met her gaze, surprised, then nodded once. I was tired, he said, of being studied instead of heard, of being invited to the table but never allowed to speak freely. I wanted to build a place where students didn't have to shrink in order to fit. Jalen added, you built it here. The next day, Principal Harding invited Elijah into her office. She offered him tea and closed the door gently. They've asked you to speak at the academic conference next month, she said. Keynote. He raised an eyebrow. I told them you might decline. Elijah smirked faintly. You were right. She leaned forward. They're not asking out of charity or guilt. They've seen what you're doing. And for the first time in years, they're afraid they've been wrong. Elijah looked down at the cup of tea, then back up. I'm not interested in being their redemption, he said. I'm interested in these kids. That's the only audience that matters. That evening, Naomi's mother posted a photo online. It showed her daughter at the front of the classroom, leading a Socratic discussion with her peers while Elijah sat in the back, smiling faintly. The caption read, he's not just teaching, he's raising thinkers. It was shared over 6,000 times. Local radio shows began to mention his name. Education boards across the city started asking questions about how to replicate what was happening in room 3B. Charter schools reached out. Private donors offered grants. And for the first time since he returned to Detroit, Elijah allowed himself to wonder, maybe this wasn't just a season. Maybe it was the beginning of something far greater. Yet, beneath the surface, the old resistance still simmered. At the next board meeting, Claudia stood again, arms crossed. Edison Heights must decide, she declared, whether it is a sanctuary of excellence or a laboratory of chaos. Stephen Lansing echoed her concern. But this time Harding didn't argue. She simply turned on a projector and played a short video. It showed Jalen performing his spoken word piece, Naomi reciting her poem, a student describing a breakthrough in understanding mental health through their project. When it ended, Harding looked around the table. I believe, she said, you just witnessed excellence. No vote was held. None was needed. Outside, in the crisp spring air, room 3B was planting a small garden by the west wall of the school, a class project led by Elijah and a group of students. Each student chose a flower to represent their growth. Some picked sunflowers, others lilies. A few chose wildflowers, defiant and untamed. When Naomi asked what flower he would choose, Elijah paused. Something resilient, he said, that blooms even in broken soil. The final weeks of the school year approached, but something about the air in room 3B felt timeless. The students had crossed an invisible threshold, not just into deeper knowledge but into a profound understanding of themselves and their place in the world. Elijah Monroe stood at the front of the classroom, not as a lecturer but as a conductor of thought. He guided discussions, offered gentle corrections, and let the silence do its part. He wasn't molding students into copies of himself. He was uncovering who they already were. The school walls had begun to reflect this transformation. Hallway bulletin boards once cluttered with college banners now included student-written manifestos and original art. Classroom doors were open more often. Teachers shared ideas instead of guarding them. Even Principal Harding noticed the tone of the school had shifted, less rigid, more alive. Still, the pressure on Elijah grew. He was now a symbol whether he liked it or not. News outlets ran features with headlines like, "The Detroit Educator Changing the Game," and "The Genius Hiding in Room 3B. Anonymous letters arrived at the school praising him, some laced with envy, a few with veiled threats. One morning, Naomi found a newspaper on her desk, folded to an article about Elijah. Beneath his picture, the headline read, "From Cambridge to Classroom, the genius nobody knew." She smiled, then passed it to Jalen. But Elijah never mentioned it. He taught the same way he always had, with patience, clarity, and an unshakable belief in the potential of his students. The final project of the year was simple in concept, complex in execution. Create something that reflects what you've learned, not just in school but about yourself. There were no rubrics, no grades, just the challenge to be honest. Naomi wrote a one-woman play about generational silence between mothers and daughters. Jalen produced a short documentary titled What They See, interviewing students of color across elite schools in Michigan. Other students painted murals, choreographed dances, and wrote essays that read like published memoirs. On the last day of school, Room 3B didn't hold a party. They held a symposium. Chairs were arranged in a circle. Students shared their work, their reflections, their truths. Some cried. Others laughed. A few stood in silence, letting their presence speak for them. When the last student finished, Elijah stood. He looked at each face, once guarded, now glowing. "Education," he said, "isn't about filling your head. It's about freeing your mind. The world will try to measure you with broken rulers. Don't let it." They clapped for him then, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Later that afternoon, he stayed behind as the students drifted out. The room felt sacred. So, as if it knew something important had just ended. Or maybe something greater had just begun. Principal Harding entered quietly. "You'll be getting a call this week," she said. "From the mayor's office. They want you on the Education Advisory Council." Elijah smiled softly. "I'll think about it." "You're not planning to leave us, are you?" He shook his head. "No, not yet." She nodded and turned to leave. But at the door she stopped. "They were wrong, you know." "Who?" "The ones who doubted you. The ones who said you didn't belong here." He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "They weren't wrong. They just didn't know what I was here to do." Later that night, Elijah walked the halls of Edison Heights alone. He paused outside Room 3B. Inside, the walls were bare again. The desks were stacked. The lights dimmed. But he knew the real work wouldn't stay inside that room. It would live in Naomi's fierce plays, in Jalen's truth-telling lens, in every student who now knew how to ask the questions no test could measure. Elijah stepped out into the Detroit dusk. The city hummed with life, honest, raw, unpolished, just like his classroom. He walked past brick buildings and corner stores, past murals and bus stops, past whispers of the boy he used to be and the teacher he had become. And as he disappeared into the deepening gold of evening, the city held him, not as a mystery, not as an outsider, but as what he had always been. The genius nobody knew. The end. 7 moral lessons from The Genius Nobody Knew. 1. Never judge a person by their appearance or background. Dr. Elijah Monroe walked into Edison Heights not as a celebrity, not as a man of reputation, but as a quiet black educator in a world that measured value by prestige and pedigree. The parents, and even some colleagues, made assumptions based on how he looked, where he came from, and what they thought a qualified teacher should be. But Elijah's presence was proof that genius does not always come dressed in the expected uniform. His depth, intellect, and heart were hidden in plain sight, reminding us that wisdom doesn't need to announce itself to exist. The world is filled with gifted individuals who are overlooked because they don't fit someone else's idea of what greatness looks like. This story challenges us to examine our biases, and to open our eyes, not just to what's on paper, but to the richness that often lives quietly beneath the surface. 2. True education is about liberation, not just information. Throughout the story, Elijah teaches in a way that defies tradition. He does not simply pass knowledge down, he ignites it within his students. He pushes them to question, to feel, to wonder. His classroom becomes more than a space for memorizing facts. It becomes a place where minds are unlocked. He shows us that the heart of teaching lies not in curriculum but in connection. Education should not be about molding people into a system, but about setting them free from its limitations. The most powerful learning happens when students are allowed to become thinkers, not just achievers. And the greatest teachers don't seek obedience, they seek transformation. 3. Greatness often grows in silence. For much of the story, Dr. Monroe says little about who he really is. He doesn't list his accomplishments or flaunt his past. He does the work quietly, faithfully. In a world that often glorifies loud ambition and spotlight chasing, Elijah represents a different kind of strength, the strength of humility. He lets the results speak for him. The growth of his students, their confidence, their clarity, these become his resume. This reminds us that we don't always need to prove ourselves with words. Sometimes, the most lasting impact comes from simply doing the work patiently, with integrity. 4. Change requires courage, especially in places built on tradition. Elijah steps into an elite institution built on centuries of unspoken rules. His very presence is a disruption. He teaches in ways that threaten the status quo. And at every step there is resistance, from parents, from systems, from peers. But he doesn't bend. He knows that meaningful change never comes easily. It requires resilience, especially when you're the only one pushing against the grain. Whether you're a student speaking your truth or a teacher challenging outdated norms, this story reminds us that progress always begins with someone brave enough to stand alone until others catch up. 5. Students are more than test scores. At Edison Heights, success is often measured by grades, college acceptances, and polished presentations. But Elijah sees beyond those metrics. He sees students as full human beings, with fears, hopes, questions, and voices that matter. He creates space for them to speak, to stumble, to explore their stories. In doing so, he unlocks a level of achievement that traditional methods never could. His students become not just high performers, but thinkers, artists, leaders. The story challenges us to rethink what it means to be smart, and to remember that education is not about ranking students, it's about raising them. 6. Legacy is built through people, not awards. Dr. Monroe had once held positions at the world's most prestigious institutions. He had likely stood on stages, received accolades, maybe even authored groundbreaking research. But none of that fulfilled him the way this classroom in Detroit did. His legacy wasn't in titles. It was in Jalen's voice, in Naomi's courage, in the questions his students learned to ask. The story teaches us that what we leave behind isn't measured by status, but by the lives we've touched, the minds we've awakened, and the truths we've helped others find within themselves. 7. Everyone has a place, but sometimes you have to build it yourself. Elijah did not wait for permission to matter. He didn't wait for the world to acknowledge his worth. He stepped into a place that had not been built for him and made space where there was none. In doing so, he not only claimed his place, he expanded the walls so others could belong too. This is perhaps the most powerful lesson of all. In a world that often excludes, silences, or overlooks, there is something revolutionary about choosing to show up anyway. To teach, to lead, to heal. Not for recognition, not for reward, but because you believe the next generation deserves something better. Thank you for watching and listening to The Genius Nobody Knew. We hope this story left you inspired, challenged, and reminded of the quiet power that lives in all of us, waiting to be seen, heard, and believed in. If this story moved you in any way, we'd love for you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And don't forget, there are more powerful stories waiting for you right here. Check out the other videos on this channel for more inspiration, motivation, and lessons that speak to the heart. Drop a comment below to let us know what stood out to you the most. We truly value your voice and your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and remember, sometimes the people the world overlooks are the ones who change it.